Yeah, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Christie David, and I run a mortgage broking business called Atelier Wealth, where we specialize in helping property investors start out and scale up their property portfolios. And quite often we deal with two types of property investors. I say the ambitious and the aspiring property investors. Sometimes they're frustrated. Maybe they've been told their borrowing capacity is too low. Maybe they're just being told no. We are always looking for ways to try and help property investors make good, confident property decisions, but also acquire high-performing assets. And I think that's one part of the conversation that gets overlooked a little bit, which is maybe it's quantity over quality. We like to flip it on its head and go buy quality rather than quantity, and quality never goes out of fashion. And a big part of an investor's team, and I think something that I say consistently flies under the radar, is their property manager. I don't call them a property manager, I call them an asset manager, because they're managing your greatest asset. And today we're joined by Lauren Robinson from Rental Results. G'day, Lauren. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Aaron. Thanks for having me today.
Not at all. I want to start by saying thank you very much for jumping on. Now, Lauren, you've been and you don't look it, and I hope that comes across as a compliment.
Thank you.
For quite some time. So we want to talk about with 2 decades of experience, having run your own property management and now having sold that, for example, having authored a book called Rented, for example, I know you've bought properties as well. There are a lot of strings to your bow that when you're talking to landlords, i.e. investors, and then talking to tenants, there's probably a sense of knowledge. There's probably a lot of empathy that comes out daily. And that's the kind of the essence that I want to take from you and share with our listeners as well, if that's all right. But before we kick off, a little bit about yourself personally, professionally, your own property journey in a nutshell, if you want to share.
Yeah, I guess personally, like I started in property management when I was 18. I was really lucky to work for an amazing property management only company. It was I think one of the first in Queensland, perhaps even Australia. And so I worked there for 8 years. We had at the time 1,800 properties, and then they sold the business. And during that time, like I was surrounded by a lot of property investors myself. So it kind of got me into the bug of property investing. So bought my first property at 22, then went on to buy another property at 24. And then it sort of rolled on from there. And I just, love property, live and breathe it. As I mentioned before, my husband's a builder. So we both really maybe me more so. I'd be happy to go to open homes every weekend, him not so much. But
what job have you roped me into here?
We both love real estate. So so I guess in terms of professionally, been in property management a long time, but also I've done a marketing and business degree, done an interior design. I did a diploma in that as well. So, and I think just constantly learning and continually looking at ways I can gather more knowledge to make sure that the investment process is more streamlined and we're offering exactly what the client wants. So, yeah.
How good's that? I mean, that's a unique journey that you've got, right? So you've been knee deep in property management, but also the interior design and having the skills around building. You can probably see, you probably have this a beautiful knack to be able to walk in somewhere and go, okay, I think this is what's possible here, and almost see what other people can't see.
I think, definitely I've learned so much over the years from starting when I was, 18, not knowing much at all, and just being surrounded by all these amazing investors and seeing property every day and learning from a lot of the people that we work for as well. You just generally, through osmosis, you gather a bit of information over the time, and it's been exceptional.
Yeah, learning from osmosis, and then also learning from where people have succeeded and also made some not so great decisions as well. I'm sure that's been part of your journey. So going on that journey, what do you think you've seen that great investors have done particularly well and other people maybe started and lost their way?
Yeah, I mean, in my personal journey, one of those examples where perhaps I have made mistakes along the way, and you learn from that too. But I definitely have seen other people do the same. And I think really knowing from the very outset what your goal is with your investment property. So whether you're chasing capital growth, whether you want to develop the property in the future, or whether you're chasing really high rental yield, I think that's really important to understand that. I guess where I have nearly tripped up a few times, but also perhaps could have done better, is purchasing properties that I thought I would want to live in long term, and especially when I was 21. A property, and I actually got fairly lucky in that I purchased a townhouse in a small complex in Paddington in Brisbane, which was only 4 kilometres from the city. So, but I nearly bought off the plan, and I nearly bought in a really large development because the shininess and the pool and all of those things were really attractive. And I think if you're choosing to buy for lifestyle, that's a different sort of consideration. But I think I look back at what I spent on a property like a townhouse or an apartment when I was younger, and that, essentially that was pretty much all I could afford at that time. Right. But perhaps if I'd held out and bought land and a house, then I would have had more opportunities to develop that and create further wealth. And obviously we've seen a lot of growth in Brisbane, especially in the last few years. So
it's a common something you reflect in hindsight for a lot of people going, I wish I bought a house.
Yes.
And I think, at the time though, your income was lower than what it is now. Your knowledge is less than it is now. Your deposit was less than what it is now as well. Definitely. So you generally get in at what you can afford. And for a lot of first timers, it's getting into a unit or apartment or a townhouse, maybe at best. And it's, well, do you try and buy something a little bit further out? That's land. And I think that's something you've touched on there. So sometimes it's buying for first time buyer benefits that gets you into the market as well. But asset selection, I think it's just get anything to get into the market, and that's serves you well if you're lucky. But I think what you're saying is, well, hang on, it's not just now getting into the market. So what's that actual longer term game plan as well?
And I think often you create a lot of that wealth or at the beginning when you're buying. So I think surrounding yourself by experts like buyers agents, mortgage brokers, really talking to the people on the ground in this, like different sales agents, and getting to know that market, and property managers, of course, but really knowing as much as possible to make an informed decision is really the key to it all. Yeah,
well said. Well said, perfect. So take me through property management experience. I mean, Queensland, we see a lot of clients that have been buying in and around Queensland, and there's different laws, some different policies, legislation around property management. So can you share me some of the ones that probably catch out newer investors that are investing?
We've had a lot of changes to the legislation in the last few years. One of the most recent ones was in regards to the rental freeze. So now we've got, and I guess the fact that it's been retrospectively dated too, and one of my properties has been affected by that too. So because we've seen such significant increases in the rent, a lot of landlords perhaps have staggered that increase. So to get it to market rent, it might have been, $100 increase. So they might have said, okay, we'll put it up $70 for the first 6 months, and then a continuation of an additional $30 afterwards. And with that new legislation that's come out, we can no longer increase that rent. So not the end of the world. And I guess we're in line now with a lot of other states, but it's just something to be aware of, because if you did have that increase in there, perhaps it kicked off in January next year, unless there's been 12 months between that rent increase, that no longer applies. We've got minimum housing standards coming out, so that comes out later in the year. And I guess just a few things to be aware of. A lot of those things in regards to the new minimum housing legislation is pretty standard. So I think it's things that as a tenant you would expect. So things like mold, you would not expect to move into a property with mold, and making sure that the property doesn't have leaks and things like that. So there's nothing in there that I think is outrageous or, going to cause investors any harm. I think if your property doesn't meet the standards, it's probably time to review that as an investor anyway, because we have obligations as landlords. So, yeah.
Well said. There's probably a newer breed of properties that are coming out, which are dual key.
Yes.
Well, and there are some investors really favourite two incomes kind of that one property as well. So what's been your experience with dual keys as well?
I personally am a big fan, and I think you definitely get a really good return from those dual keys. So I'm chasing a dual key investment property myself in a particular location outside of Brisbane. But yeah, I think you've just got to be careful that it complies with your local council regulations. So dual occupancy is fantastic, and we see a lot of owners wanting to convert maybe the downstairs area of their house into a granny flat and things like that. But just making sure that it's council approved for that dual key is really the importance of that, because if you're, you know, renting out a property on the one title and it's not being council approved, then there can be all sorts of issues surrounding that. So just making sure everything's above board, really.
Beautiful. And so, I mean, you've just shared with us that you're looking at it as an investor. Is it the yield that you're looking at that's attractive to you? Is it location? What's kind of catching your fancy on that one?
And there's we're very close to purchasing one we just missed out, which I think about all the time. But yeah, I mean, I guess for us, we're looking for something that we can add value to. So something that, you know, perhaps needs a bit of work to bring it up to a more modern standard. Yeah. And I like the opportunity to be able to rent one long term and perhaps Airbnb the other. So just diversify that risk. But it depends on where you're looking. So the places we're looking are also lifestyle locations, so close to the beach and things like that. So it's just a different type of investment. We're also chasing something that has development potential in the future. So we could possibly, you know, build 2 duplexes or even build a house. So I think, yeah, I guess that's the thing, really understanding and being clear on what you're looking for before you go out into the market. And sometimes that can take, I guess, maybe like 6 or 12 months of really looking at lots of properties and then getting very clear on that, or going straight to a buyer's agent and just, you know, utilizing that knowledge.
Yeah, well said. I guess, when you're co-investing with a partner, in this case, your husband, I say you can't build a house of 2 different blueprints. So when you're trying to financially get an investment strategy together, sometimes you do need someone impartial, like a buyer's agent, to do a property strategy report or a bit of a game plan for someone in that situation as well. So I guess, have you had any healthy friction when it comes to, I'm looking to this and you're looking to this, and investing with two different, I guess, outlooks as well, right?
Definitely. And I think sometimes when you miss out, because the market's been so tight, you know, sometimes there is that, I guess, that sort of that feeling that, oh, we'll just have to take the next one. And, you know, it's really about, you know, getting very clear on what you're looking for and just being patient, which is something I lack. I just want to make it happen. But yeah, I think my husband Steve, he just reminds me, you know, no, this is what we want, and, you know, we just need to focus on that. So
sounds like the perfect yin yang balance. It's like, I want to go again, just
yes,
we'll get there. And sounds exactly like how we are in our household as well. Except I'm the impatient one. So talking about, and I say to our investor clients, so think about your client. Your client is the landlord, the tenant is what I meant to say. So ways to increase rent, I would guess, it's under market rent, therefore I've got to put it up. If they decide to move out and you've got a week's worth of vacancy, the reletting costs, for example, the brain damage that comes at changing tenants versus keeping someone happier. Are you having those conversations where you go, okay, look, we can review the rent, just because we can doesn't mean we have to. A happy tenant could be a very happy long-term investment as well. How are you having conversations with your landlords to make sure you got happy tenants? Because as a property manager, you've got effectively 2 types of clients. You've got the one that pays you, which is the landlord and the investor, and you've got to keep your tenant on site and very happy and engaged as well, right?
Definitely. I think it's definitely a fine line. I think at the end of the day, as a property manager, we work for our landlord, who's essentially our client. And I think it's guiding them to let them know where the property sits in the current market, you know, and whatever price that might be, and just talking through the repercussions. So for example, if the property has increased by, say, $100 a week, you know, we could say, well, look, these are great tenants, they've been there long term, perhaps we do a smaller increase or slightly below market rent, so maybe we go up $80, or we stagger that in. Well, we can't actually stagger that increase anymore, but yeah, that was something we would suggest before. Or perhaps, you know, it really just depends on the investor. I mean, obviously for investors, we've had 10 interest rate rises, and everything has increased as well. So I think whilst it's, you know, you really want to keep fantastic tenants and you don't want to lose those tenants, you've really got to weigh up, you know, the cost of not increasing it to the market rent, but also, you know, well, what if these tenants were to vacate what's the potential costs around that, and just weighing up all your options. And I think that's where having those conversations with your property manager are really important, so that you make that educated decision. Every investor is different. And sometimes I have investors who say, look, I don't care about the money. I just want really quality tenants who are going to stay long term.
Yeah.
And other investors, that it does come down to the bottom line, and, whether they might have several properties and they need that increase to counteract all the interest rate rises.
Yeah, correct. And then, so ways to increase the rent, for example, are you suggesting some other ways? I know that, especially Queensland, for example, a house with a pool tends to have a premium, for example. Storage or garage is another one that attracts a premium.
Yes.
What are some of the other discussions you're having with your investor clients to go, well, if you do want to increase the rent or add some value, what are some other options, alternatives as well?
I think it's looking at the particular investment property and then understanding that demographic and what they're prepared to pay more for. So, for example, if it's a property in a complex and perhaps it's a 2-bed, 2-bath, and there might be, 40, 50 apartments in there, it can be difficult to differentiate that. But adding things like additional storage above the car space, or, trying to think of things that the tenant might pay for. So perhaps it's security screens. We always suggest asking the tenants too, are there things that you would like to be added to the property that would add value for you?
Dishwasher, a property without, just trying to think a property without a dishwasher. Like dishwashers save marriages in my.
Definitely, yes. And especially for families, like if you're a single person, you probably don't mind as much about washing up after yourself. But if you are a family, it's a lifesaver. Same with allowing pets. So that's a new legislation that's come in, and it becomes more and more difficult, but a lot of families do have pets. So if you have a fully fenced yard, and you're in an area that's likely to attract a family with kids and pets, then they are going to be seeking a fenced yard to make sure everyone's secure. So I think it's just really, it's a case-by-case basis, and something we can definitely assist investors with, especially if they're looking at buying a property or even if they own one. More than happy to give advice around that particular property, the demographic and what they're seeking.
Love it. Love it. Thank you very much. And then I guess going upstream a little bit is, so I've got an investment property. Now I'm looking to put a tenant in there, for example, and I think I referred to you as an asset manager. How are you then going through that selection process? Is it simply who can get the application the fastest? Is it who pays the most rent, for example? What filter mechanisms are you putting in place to go, I'm matching the right tenant to this particular property as well?
Yeah, I think right now what we're seeing is multiple applications on most properties. That's pretty standard. And I think really it's definitely not about who's put the application in first. I think if we, for example, we showed a property yesterday, we had 5 applications on that. And so of those 5 applications, ultimately it's the landlord's decision, but we guide them. So we always encourage tenants to put in cover letters just to explain a little bit more about them, because I often think the application form itself really just scratches the surface. It tells us, who they are, where they've been living, and how they're going to pay the rent, but there might be a lot more to that person.
Yeah.
And I think from an investor point of view, we want to know, are they going to look after the property? Are they going to pay the rent? Are they going to be respectful of my asset, essentially? So it's just those little things that I think sometimes a cover letter adds value to a landlord. But yeah, as all property managers are doing, we're checking that the tenant's not blacklisted, we're checking all rental history, all the standard stuff. But yeah, I think sometimes that cover letter really gives an insight into who that person is.
You are spot on. And I'll share one anecdote. So we had a team member that moved from overseas to Australia. And the first thing that we all thought of is trying to get a rental in this market. It's got to be particularly tough.
Mm-hmm.
But I called a few of the agents in the area, introduced ourselves. Here's a situation. Here's a letter, for example, gave us some detail, built the relationship. And what I felt was what they want to know is, yes, are you going to take care of this property? Are you going to pay rent on time? And is there going to be any potential issues down the track? And I thought, if we can address that, for example, and we went from having no properties to having choice of 3, and everyone's saying, well, hang on, isn't it hard to get a rental? Saying, well, actually, mate, if you be proactive about it, you can almost get your pick because you're presenting yourself as the ideal tenant, which de-risks a property manager, because that's ultimately more time, more effort that goes on managing a bad tenant versus a great tenant that flies on the radar, doesn't cause any fuss, for example. and then you have a great working relationship with your landlord as well.
Exactly. And I mean, sometimes we have tenants who perhaps are not employed at the time, but have money in the bank account. So rather than, that is a risk for the landlord that they could go out tomorrow and spend that money on a car or something. So perhaps they might decide to offer the rent in advance. So that takes away that risk. So I think, if you're a tenant looking at how to put your best foot forward, obviously a cover letter, but also just working out, well, where do I sit amongst the other applicants that perhaps are going forward, and how would I satisfy those risks that might be something that the landlord picks up.
Spot on. Even when clients that are purchasing, I'm like, the cover letter, because the agents are meeting so many people coming through.
Yeah.
Your photos on a cover letter, a little bit about us. Here's what we're looking to do, and here's the ideal home that we're looking to buy. Sell the story a little bit.
Yes.
Create an unfair advantage for yourselves, but it's a bit like a resume. Like you're putting your best foot forward for a job. You're going to put your best foot forward, whether it's for buying a property or securing a rental as well. So I think it's sage advice there, and thanks very much for sharing. One of the other, I'll call it a gripe, and you probably have the same thing as well, is when we go to look at photos and there's like a photo of the outside and one photo of the inside, and it doesn't sell the property. And I'm like, well, what is with the lack of photos? And we see this all the time, even in commercial, for example, where commercial properties, when they're going to sell them or rent out commercials, and there's one photo or two photos, like what is the property hiding? Is coming as my first thought. And why are the photos so poor?
Yes.
I'm sure you're not guilty of this, but can you tell me what is up with that?
I mean, instantly think there's something wrong with a property if we're not getting photos of every room. So, and therefore you're not doing the landlord or the seller any justice by advertising that property. So, we always, at our office, we always have professional photography. We have 2D, 3D floor plans. We do a Matterport virtual walkthrough. So we're trying to give people as much information as possible, because we want to have qualified tenants coming through these investment properties. It just saves everybody time. Our office, the tenant, we don't want to waste their time either. If the layout's not going to suit their needs, there's no point having a master bedroom and 3 young children on different levels if that's not what the family are looking for. So I think providing as much information as possible is really the key to making sure it all works well.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, it almost sounds offensive, but it's almost lazy, I find, when I'm like, where's with the photos? Or the photos are just taken on an iPhone and not very good at all. It's like, this is my property. This is a great asset that I've got. Why isn't it being marketed or pitched very well? But
yeah. Definitely. And I think when you weigh up, in sales, it can be thousands of dollars for an advertising campaign for a sales property, where rentals, majority of the time it's less than $500. So it's essentially 1 week's rent or even less. So I think it's very important to make sure it's marketed properly, because if you can rent your property within a week, as opposed to sitting there for weeks, you've already saved that money.
That's correct. Perfect. Now, you're one of the elite few that have written a book and published. I want to say congrats on your book called Rented. Tell us a little bit more about what inspired it, and if someone's looking to pick up a copy as well, what can they expect to go from cover to cover?
Yeah, I guess, thank you. I know you're looking at renting. Well, have you written your book yet?
I am in the process of, so putting it out there to the universe now makes me very, very accountable.
Sorry.
I love it. And it is, I can say from first-hand experience, it is a labor of love, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. It is. Essentially, like we've done a similar program, or the same program, in terms of writing that book, and that's been fantastic to guide around that process. But for me, often when I spoke to landlords, I was getting asked the same sort of questions. And I think, something that seems second nature in our roles, because we do it every day, is something that people are craving that information or wanting to know more about. So that's why I chose to write the book. It was back in 2018 now, so probably time to update the book. But and there's a bit of legislation around in Queensland, and a lot has changed and continually changes. But I tried to make it sort of that information that investors want to know, but also I guess that doesn't continually expire or get updated as quickly in terms of the legislation. So I guess it's also a little bit about sort of the mistakes I see people make along the way, things that, perhaps would help them with their investment journey. And I think when I was looking back at when I first started in property investment, it's sort of not knowing that you want to buy a property, but who do I speak to? Where do I turn? Who do I need to have around me to make sure I make a good decision? Because it's a lot of money. And probably one of those things that, it's definitely not an everyday occurrence, and you just don't want to make mistakes along the way.
Yeah, well said. Well said. And I think to your point around the book, it's nothing about you. It's almost, this is how people take information in. So retain.
Yes.
And so something like this, where people may listen to the podcast, may watch the video, for example, or read the article. Same with the book. Some people learn through touching that tactile and reading a book and making some notes and then learning then to follow you. It's like, that's the journey that someone may need to go on to absorb that type of information as well, isn't it?
Definitely. And I think, as someone who's done it like yourself, like I think as much information that we can share with others, and they perhaps don't make mistakes that we've seen or we've done ourselves, the better, really, because I think there's a lot that we can impart on people. That's
it. And that's what I love about professionals like yourself, and just wanted to share. I had a friend that really challenged me on like marketing. I was like, he's like, how much knowledge do you have? I'm like, heaps. He's like, well, why aren't you sharing that knowledge? Like, think about it, you can only help a person one-on-one sometimes, and they've got to make an appointment, and you can only do that in the time that you're given, versus if you can just give away as much knowledge as possible, help people. And if they want to seek you out, they'll seek you out, but take that mountain of knowledge and just share it as much with people, and what they do with that then is up to them. And yes. I think that's what where your heart's in the right place, which is, I just want to be able to share good quality information with people that want to seek it out and help them build wealth through property by not making mistakes and making more good decisions in their lives as well. And you've obviously been there, done that. So I want to say thank you very much, Lauren. Really appreciate it.
Oh, no, thank you. I've listened to many of your episodes too and learned a lot along the way too. So I think, it's fantastic, these podcasts, because they really do give back, which is great.
Isn't it? It's a great community of people that have come on, be willing to share their time and share their knowledge, and great investors. Anyone that's done well in any field is generous with their time and their knowledge, because they want to see other people do well. And we come from like a really heart-centered place like that, that people, their prosperity, no one's threatened by that. In fact, we want to see more people rise and grow their wealth as well in a great way, because great investors will then pay that forward. And renting, while it might serve you for a certain time in your life, that could be there for that person's life to then help them to go and buy their own home, for example. And so that treating tenants with respect as well, I think, is a big part of what we say to our investor clients, which is, we probably all rented at some stage in our lives, and we just wanted a fair landlord, isn't it?
Yes. Oh, for sure. And I mean, I think some of our team are renters as well. And I think one of the best things that we gain out of them going out and trying to find a rental property is we always try and debrief afterwards as, how was that experience? What happened? And it's really actually interesting, because we're like, okay, well, what could we do to make that better? Because we want to try and take that stress away from tenants so that it's actually a nice experience. It's not delayed, and we want it to be a better experience all round.
Empathy is a powerful thing, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Well, we've all been there, and we all know what it feels like. And I think it's just making sure it's stress free, because it is a really quite a stressful time, especially in a market like we're in now, where there's limited stock.
Yeah, you hear some hard stories about people that are having their rents pushed up by $100, $200 a week, and I understand it's a capitalist world we live in, but there's also some socialist elements to it. We're like, okay, just because you can doesn't mean you have to. There's someone else at the end of that could be struggling to make ends meet. And obviously some things come out in the budget. There's obviously legislation changes around that as well. I think Airbnbs and some places across Australia putting caps on that as well. So I think the government's trying to do what they can. Obviously, interviewing with the property market has its own unintended consequences as well. But I guess it's a free market on the flip side to that as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Perfect. Hey, Lauren, I want to say thank you again. Really appreciate it. If you want to get in touch with Lauren and her team now I feel like you've changed the name to Longview.
Yes, we've rebranded a few weeks ago to Longview, Queensland. So we've got a sister office in Melbourne. But yeah, so we can help clients in Melbourne as well as Brisbane. But yeah, more than happy to, if anyone wants to reach out. And I do have a list of questions that I can share with you, that questions to ask a potential property manager that might just help people when they're on their search for a potential property manager.
Excellent. I'll put you on the spot. We may even get a couple of copies of your book as well, maybe to give away.
Yes,
To
of course, yes.
Out there. Oh, that'd be great if we could do that. So if you are keen, you want to find out more, check out Lauren's website details, connect with Lauren via socials, and we'll also run a giveaway on one of a couple of books to give out as well. That's a wrap for another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. If you found that helpful, feel free to leave us a review, or better yet, just drop us a line with some questions that you'd love to have answered in future episodes as well. And until next time, take care.